to your neighbor. That's right. Turn around. Look him in the eye. Say it's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. Y'all say it's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. A little louder. It's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright.
Yes, good afternoon, people. Blessed FM family. This is the new Afrocentricity book show. This is the new book club. This is the first club, the first one today. My name is Brother Jegna, coming to you live and direct from Blessed FM Radio. So, this is the Afrocentricity book club, which we will look at topics such as culture, spirituality, history, economics, psychology and health, and any topic that you would like to talk about yourself. So we will read books, chapters, essays. So if you are listening now, you are all honorary members to this new club. The show will be nothing without you listening and interacting with the show. So if you'd like to text in, you'd like to call in, the studio line is 07 944 431 366. That is 07 944 431 366. So there's only one criteria for the show, and this criteria is that members, that we deal with truth. If you're looking for truth, you're in the right place. If you're not looking for truth, you need to listen, and you will come around to what the truth is. Who will be reading books from some of our very specialists, of our great scholars, and we'll see what truth they come into, okay? So, the thing with us at the moment is that the only way forward for us is to deal with truth, complete truth, We cannot be dealing with fantasies and falsehoods or misconceptions, We need truth. So, if anything is in our way to stop us free in our mind, our body and our soul, we need to eject those, reject them and eradicate them, So again, this is the Afrocentricity book club, and we are dealing with truth and education and truth. So some people may ask, well, why is this important? Do we need truth? Well, one answer is that we need to look at the state of black people wherever you may find them across the globe, Are they in a strong position, healthy, dynamic position? If you agree with me, you may believe that they are not. So the next question would be, is why are they in that position? So my own answer to this question is that we are not dealing with reality. We are dealing with fantasies, maybe beliefs, which could be false beliefs, and also lies, Because if we are dealing with reality, you could argue that the position that black people are in today, we would not be in that position. We would not hold that position today, So it's key that we deal with fantasy. We eject fantasies, my apologies, and deal with the truth. So if we knew reality, we'll know who we are. And once we know who we are, we'll act as we're supposed to be acting. So who are we? We are African people. We are black people. So it's very important we deal with fantasies and we look at the world through our own eyes. So this is the Afrocentricity book club. Some people may ask, what is Afrocentricity? Well, put very simply, Afrocentricity is a concept or philosophy of black people looking at the world through their own eyes, being ourselves again, with no apology. So it's nothing really difficult to be, because can you be yourself? I can be myself. I'm sure you can be yourself. But some of us do not know ourselves, and why is that? It's generally due to miseducation. We're educated in the schools, not actually run by ourselves, and those schools generally are Eurocentric, for example. So we look at the world through the perspective of Europeans. And if we're African people, that is not the correct way to look. Why would I say that? Because you may be aware that Europeans don't look kind of fairly, or we don't look well on African people. And if we are looking at the world through the eyes of people who don't actually like African people or black people, then we might pick up perspectives of the world that we look badly on ourselves. So there is a quote I like to give to you guys, And this was made by the great scholar, researcher, and author and historian called Runoko Rashidi. So Runoko Rashidi said, what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves. And what we think of ourselves depends on what we know about ourselves. And what we know about ourselves depends on what we have been told about ourselves. So sometimes people say, why did he do this? Or why did she act in that way? And the thing is really is what we have in our minds makes us act, which we might think is normal, beneficial to us. But when we check it and really check who we are and look at the world through our eyes, we may notice that actually maybe we shouldn't be doing that. Maybe we should take a different path. So the education system which we go through, our children go through, are structured in that way. So a more correct way of this saying this education system is really to call it a miseducational system. Yeah. So we get indoctrinated by views which, put simply, are not the truth in so many regards. So I'm not talking about maths or English and subjects like that, but I'm talking about maybe history and culture, feels like that. We don't get our understanding who we are, and normally it's very negative. So if you think back to your elders or adults, yeah, think back to school. What did you learn about black people, African people? For the most part, you're not even aware of any kind of ancient history of African people. You may be told, well, you were a slave. That's normally where it starts. And Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, and things like that. We are not aware of the history and the culture of African people generally. So this book show will hopefully make a big change to that, yeah? Become aware. So today, because today is Sunday, what we're going to do, we're going to look at spirituality, and we're going to look at religion in particular, yeah? So religion is really the man-made version of spirituality. So when you are part of a religion, generally, you are not educated about religion generally. We are told to read this book. Doesn't matter whether it's the Bible, the Quran, and they'll say to you, this is the only book that you need to know. But another key thing they'll say to you is, do not criticize the book. You're not really supposed to ask questions, because I know people in the church or in the mosque will ask questions, and they say to them, well, this is really above your head. You don't need to know that, Just read what this book says, and you're kind of good to go. So sometimes, if you do not question the book, or if you do question the book, they say that you're wicked, and you go to hell, and you're not supposed to question the book. So, I grew up thinking, or I was taught really, that you must question everything, yeah? You must question everything what comes before you. Just to accept things on someone's say-so is maybe put us in the wrong place. As African people, we have been lied to more than anybody else on the whole planet. So we need to question everything that comes before us, yeah? Because if we don't question things, that's when we'll start to live out fantasies and beliefs and, lies, and become indoctrinated with this, which is obviously detrimental to our healthy well-being, our healthy mind, body, and soul. So today we're going to look at maybe how religion came about, yeah? Religion generally, and then we might look at the relation, black people in relation to religion. So some people know some of the things I'm going to say, some might have a little idea, but I think many of us may be completely unaware of the relationship of black people to religion, yeah? Because if you don't question these things, we are ignorant of the facts. And ignorance is no way to live, yeah? Because the Creator gave us a brain to use. And if we don't ask questions, are we using our brain? If we're not questioning things, are we using our brain? It's very critical that we do use our brains, yeah? We are not supposed to be ignorant, yeah? That's why we was given a brain. So today we're going to have a look at how religion evolved in the world, and then we can look at religion in relation to black people, okay? So we're going to got some books here, so for some of our great scholars. So the first scholar I'm going to read some of their research from is John G. Jackson. So John G. Jackson is one of our, again, an excellent scholar. He's written many books. So the book I'm going to be looking at here at the moment is called Christianity. I'm just going to read on the introduction. It's called Christianity Before Christ. And this was published in 1985. So I know some of you may ask, well, let me read the introduction. He says, the title of this essay may appear to be somewhat paradoxical. They may ask, could there be Christianity before Christ? Well, the great African church father, St. Augustine, studied this question, and this is how St. Augustine answered. St. Augustine said, that which is known as Christian religion existed among the ancients, and never did not exist from the beginning of the human race until the time when Christ came in the flesh, at which time the true religion, which had already existed, began to be called Christianity. So that's very interesting. This is from the work of a writer called Alvin Boyd Kuhn, and the book is which this quote comes from is called The Shadow of the 3rd Century. So, question is, Christianity before Christ? John Jackson goes on. The above passage was followed by the appended commentary. He says that this astonishing declaration was made by the early 4th century of our era. It can be asserted with little chance of refutation that this affirmation of the pious Augustine had not sunk out of sight, but had been kept in open view through that period of Western history. The whole course of that history would have been vastly altered for the better. It is only too likely the case that the obvious implications of that passage were such a nature that is open for exploitation, was designedly frowned upon by the ecclesiastical authorities, that's really the church authorities, in every age. It held the kernel of a great truth, the common knowledge of which would have been a stumbling block in the way of the perpetuation of the priestly power over the general Christian mind. So he's saying here really that if that quote from our great Christian father, St. Augustine, was widely known, that it would be a stumbling block to the Christian church. So he goes on, for what is it that the Christian saint actually says? It stands as hardly less than a point-blank repudiation of all the chief assertiveness which is the structure of the Christian tradition rests. Every child born to Christian parents over these 18 centuries has been indoctrinated with unqualified belief that Christianity was completely new, and that the first true religion in world history, that it was vouchsafed to the world by God himself and brought down to earth by the sole divine emissary ever commissioned to convey God's truth over mankind. And it's also believed that it was flashed out in the pagan darkness, like the first set of light in the pagan darkness, as the first ray of true light to illuminate the pathway of evolution to the safe treading of human feet. All previous religion was the superstitious product of primitive childishness of mind. Christianity was the first piercing of that long night of black heathenism by the benighted gift of God. So I don't know what you believe. I hope you will text in and let me see some of your views on this, yeah? But St. Augustine, the great Christian father, said that Christianity, or this religion, always existed, but later on it became to be called Christianity. So I'm going to give you a wider view of religion and how religion came about, yeah? Because if you just only know one book, you're really ignorant of the facts about how Christianity, or religion generally I should say, came about. So first of all, I'm going to read chapter 6 of a book by John G. Jackson from his book called Man, God and Civilization. And this is chapter 6. Man, God, Civilization was published in 1972. So chapter 6 is titled The Worship of Nature. So he goes on. The worship of nature is based on a personification of natural phenomena. For the men and women of olden times personified the various objects and forces of nature and worship them as gods. In these nature worships, that great humanist, this is the writer, Edward Carpenter, observed. So this is what Edward Carpenter said. He said, there may be discerned three fairly independent streams of religious or quasi-religious enthusiasm. So he numbers them. Number one, that which is connected with the phenomena of the heavens, the movements of the suns, planets and stars, and the awe and the wonderment they excite. Number two is that connected with the seasons and the very important matter of growth of vegetation and food of the earth. And number 3, that connected with the mysteries of sex and reproduction. It is obvious that these 3 streams would mingle and interfuse with each other a good deal. But as far as they were separable, the first would tend to create solar heroes and sun myths, the second vegetation gods and personifications of nature and the earth life, while the third would throw its glamour over the other 2 and contribute to the projection of deities or demons worshipped with all sorts of phallic rites. So he goes on. The terrestrial gods seem to be older than the celestial gods. So terrestrial, that is really the earth, the nature and things like that. So terrestrial gods seem to be older than the celestial bodies, yeah? That is the heavenly bodies. So the earthly divinities will be our first objects of study. The earth itself, worshipped under the name of the Great Mother, was the oldest of the gods of nature. This earth worship was a basic in all religions of the early Amerindians. The earth is universally believed, wrote E.J. Payne, to be the most ancient object of nature. The sun, the moon, and the stars were considered to be comparatively recent. All living creatures proceed from the earth and are all sustained by the earth. All are finally reduced to dust and return to the earth. Her motherhood was an Aboriginal American, no mere figure of speech, but an article of positive belief. So the Winnebago Indians worshipped the earth as a goddess under the name Mama, which means earth, and Konika, which means the grandmother. The Lenni of Pennsylvania regarded the earth as a universal mother and claimed that her ancestors were created in the interior of the earth, who dwelt there before coming out upon the surface. So according to the Amerindians myth makers, their early forebears lived in the bowels of the earth in human form, while others held that the progenitors existed underground in the shape of tortoises, rabbits, and groundhogs. The Caribs of the Antilles, this is like the Caribbean, considered the earth to be a benevolent mother who gave forth all the necessities of life. Among these people, an earthquake was interpreted as a sign given by Mother Earth for all and sundry to dance for the health and welfare of the tribe. So following the earthquake, they would dance for 4 days and 4 nights by the light of the moon. The dancers were bedecked in costumes. They wore multicolored masks and loaded themselves down with belts and garters, bracelets and necklaces, all covered with little shells which clashed and banged together as they jumped around in their dance, while a group of old women shook rattles and crooned a doleful song as an accompaniment. The Indians of Peru worshipped the earth as a divinity under the name Mama Pacha, which means Mother Earth. And the priests, after making sacrifices to the sun, the thunder, and the moon, and after praying for health and prosperity and victory over the reigning monarch, also sacrificed to Mother Earth and prayed to her as follows: O Mother Earth, preserve Lord Inca, thy son, who stands upon thee in peace and safety. The village Mama, located on the banks of the tribute river Rimrak River, was the seat of the famous sanctuary of the Earth Mother, who was there worshipped as the consort of Pakanmak, who is the creator. Near the village, 2 streams below the site of the sanctuary, and they were called the breasts of Mother Earth. The ancient Mexicans also worshipped the earth with elaborate rites and ceremonies, but the story is too involved to be discussed in these pages. A detailed account can be found in Fraser's book, The Golden Bough, which is a very famous book, yeah? Many different volumes. Among the ancient Egyptians, who are African people, I'm sure you know, the earth was personified as a male deity by the name of Seb, Keb, or Geb. Many people call him Gob, so Seb, Keb or Geb. And the consort of Geb was a sky goddess called Nut, N-U-T. So in Egyptian art, Seb or Geb is shown in a human form, with his head adorned by either a crown or he might have a symbol of a goose on his head. A species of geese called Seb geese was sacred to this god, because the belief was that once upon a time Geb had changed himself into a goose and had travelled throughout the air in that shape. And in the hieroglyphic inscriptions, he is symbolized as both a goose and an egg. Geb was personified by both the earth as a whole and on the surface of the earth in its green mantle of vegetation. The earth was said to be the body of Geb as well as his house. And for the earth was called the house of Geb, just as the underworld was called the house of Osiris. And the air, the house of Shu. The strange to say, on one occasion, Geb laid an egg, and this egg in due time burst asunder and gave birth to the sun, in the form of a mysterious bird, known today as the phoenix. And on account of this notorious egg-laying fair, the earth god earned the title the Great Cackler. I think like the goose, the cackles. So Geb was quite properly called the father of the gods, for the following divinities were his children. So his children were Osiris, Set, Horus, the elder, Isis, and Nephthys. The Greek mythologists identified Seb with their own Kronos, for as Osiris was said to be mutilated by his father Seb, likewise Kronos was said to be mutilated by his father Uranus. The analogy does not stop here, for Osiris in turn was mutilated by his brother Set. So I'm sure in the Bible it says Cain killed Abel, and this is the first time this happened, but in history the first time this actually happened was when Set killed his brother Osiris. And Cronus was similarly treated that way by his son Zeus. So this close similarity of Egyptian and Greek mythic beliefs should not surprise us, for as Gerald Massey observed, when Herodotus visited Egypt and recognized the African original of the Greek deities, he makes the sage remark that his countrymen, in their ignorance of the beginnings, counted the births of their gods from the time when they first acquired the knowledge of them. In ancient Sumer, so ancient Sumer is what was called Mesopotamia, which is in Iraq today. So in ancient Sumer, the earth god was named Enlil, and he was a member of a trinity. His partner was the sky god Anu and the water god Ea. The name Enlil in the Sumerian language meant Lord of the Wind or Lord of the Storm. So as we can see, he was originally a god of the air rather than of the earth. And we may note that he was a local god of Nippur, which was the holy city of the Sumerians. So later, the Semitic Babylonians, who moved into the area of the Sumerians, so the Semitic Babylonians adopted Enlil and changed his name to Bel or Baal, which title meant Lord or Master. In the center of the ancient city of Nippur, the sanctuary of Enlil was built on an artificial mound. And the outstanding feature of the sacred precinct was the great ziggurat. So ziggurat is like a pyramid temple tower. The structure was pyramidal in shape and built of brick, with a winding ramp or staircase encircling it at the bottom to the top. Such temple towers were quite common in Babylonia, and they no doubt gave rise to the biblical legend of the Tower of Babel. The great ziggurat of Nippur was built by Engar, the first king of of the Chaldees, who reigned about 2400 BC. Clay figures of Enlil, little clay figurines, unearthed by Assyriologists, show him as a man with a long hair and a beard. As a symbol of divinity, he was fitted out with a horned headdress. Enlil was called the Great Mountain, and his temple at Nippur was called El Kur, the house of the mountain. He was also titled the Lord of the lands, King of heaven and earth, and Father of the gods. It was Enlil who, at the very beginning of things, fought and subdued the powerful dragon. Normally, interrupting there, normally the dragon will be evil, yeah? So when he fought that, no doubt, he was conquering evil. And the dragon was called Tamimar, and separated the earth and the sky and created the world. Though properly the god of earth, Enlil, held that title as ruler on the surface of the earth, for he was not a personification of the material earth as a whole. Closely related, closely related to earth worship is the worship of vegetation. Tree worship especially is of great antiquity and importance for the religious history of mankind. For from trees, ancient people derived food, clothing and shelter. And the primitive people regarded trees as the abode of the spirits or gods. To appreciate this viewpoint, we must attempt to look at a tree through the eyes of untutored people, yeah? Very primitive. So when we think primitive, normally people you think of very simple people, but primitive means the first people, yeah? So the primitive ancestors of the far distant past. So the writer Edward Clodd said, although the tree is rooted to one spot, it responds to every influence without. Swayed by the breeze, smitten by the storms, it is never at rest. Murmurs are heard in his leaves, or in his branches creak or writhe as if in agony. Sounds are emitted from the gaunt stem or hollow trunk. Voices of the savage, no doubt, or the primitive people, I should say, in the indwelling spirit of life seemed permanently associated with the fixed tree, while whatever was mysterious about it added to its fears. He would honour the gift of the good power of the fruit-yielding tree, where he will get his juices from the same plant, brought in frenzy, or where the fragrant tobacco was sacrificed to the well-pleased spirits. There and by other means, close relation between gods and man and plants were set up. The Dravidians of India have for ages paid homage to trees. So the Dravidians are actually the earliest people in the India region, and again these are black people. So Dravidians in India have for ages paid homage to trees, and from them the tree cults of Buddhism and modern Hinduism have undoubtedly been derived. The sacred bo tree had been adored by the Buddhists of Ceylon for over 2,000 years, and it is said that this sacred plant was propagated from a slip of the famous tree under which Prince Gautama reclined after his temptation in the wilderness. This is Gautama Buddha. And it's further alleged that this slip was sent to Ceylon by the great Indian ruler, King Asoka, 250 years BC. The Yakuts of Siberian steppes, such as Siberia, like towards the Russian region, the Yakuts of the Siberian steppes hung presents on the branches of larches and other trees to propagate the spirits thought to reside in them. Even today, the Irish hate to cut down the white thorn tree, for it is held by them that the biblical crown of thorns was placed on the brow of Christ was made from the sacred wood of this tree. So the Dayaks of Borneo have a dread of felling certain trees which are supposedly haunted by the souls of the dead people. And certain natives in the West Indies will on no account cut down a silk cotton tree, fearing the revenge of the indwelling Duppy or ghost. A traveller in the south of Nigeria was shown a sacred tree by a citizen of the district. Yes, we say this is our life, the big tree. The visitor was told that when any of us dies, the spirit does not go to another country, but it goes into that big tree, and this is why we will not have it cut. So some information there on some religion, how the religions, kind of worked, or how people see the earth, the sacredness of the earth, the spirit of God in the earth. So I'm going on. So this is page 88 from the same book by, or called Man, God, Civilization by John Jackson. He says, sky gods were quite popular in ancient times. The father sky was generally regarded as the husband of Mother Earth. Here the ancient Egyptians chose to be different, for among them the earth was the husband and the sky was the wife. So many people say Mother Earth, but the ancient Egyptians, earth was male and the sky was female. This arrangement may have been due to the grammatical structure of the Egyptian language, for in that language the word for sky was pet, P-E-T, and in Egyptian language that is the feminine, whereas the word for earth, tu, was masculine. So in ancient Egyptian art, the earth god Geb is shown in a human form, lying on the ground, with one arm raised towards the sky, and the sky goddess Nut is pictured as a woman with her body arched over her husband's, her feet resting on the ground at one of his extremities, and her hands touching the earth at the other. And in some cases, to emphasize her identity with the sky, her body is covered with stars. According to the Egyptian tradition, the earth and sky once touched each other. The sky goddess Nut is protected as lying flat on her husband, the earth god Geb. Then Shu, which means air, the god of the air and father of the sky, he raised up the sky, so he raised up the goddess, to his present elevation above the earth. In scenes from the art of ancient Egypt, Shu is shown holding up Nut with upraised hands, and in a text from a royal tomb in Egypt it says, Shu has divided the heaven from the earth. He has uplifted the heaven in eternity above the earth. The sky goddess is spoken in the inscription as Nut, who gave birth to the gods, the lady of the heavens, the mistress of the two lands. So Egypt was two lands, two kingdoms. So sometimes ancient Egypt, the correct name is Kemet, is called the two lands. The Egypt mythologists sometimes represent the sky as a huge cow instead of a woman, and the legs of the heavenly cow were held in place by various gods, while the air god, Shu, supported the body of the cow. In one inscription, a row of stars decorates the stomach of the celestial cow, and the sun is shown travelling in a boat between her forelegs. This heavenly cow was sometimes identified with another goddess called Hathor. The Babylonians, who lived in what came in Iraq, the Babylonians worshipped a trinity which consisted of the sky god, Anu, the earth god Bel, and the water god Ea. The Semitic Babylonians inherited these gods from the Sumerians, The Sumerians used to call themselves the black-headed people or the black-faced people. So we believe that the Sumerians were actually black people. So the Babylonians came in after these and adopted their gods. So, because the Sumerians were the first civilized inhabitants of this Mesopotamia area, also called Sumeria. The original Sumerians' names for these gods were Anna, which is the sky god, Enlil, the earth god, and Enki, the water god. But since the Semitic equivalents, Anu, Bel, and Ea, were preferred in most Assyriologist works, we shall follow with that usage here. So Anu was especially worshipped at Uruk, named in the Bible in Genesis 10:10, as one of the oldest cities in Babylonia. The name Anu means the one on high, and may be traced back to the Sumerians, An, which meant the sky. Anu, as a personification of the sky, corresponds with the Greek Zeus and the Roman Jupiter. Also, like those two sky gods, he ruled over all the other gods. Anu was known as both king and father of the gods, and his high rank is shown by the allotment to him of the number 60. The number 60, that's 60, was a unit of the system of enumeration, and it was held to be a particularly sacred number, and was henceforth appropriately assigned to the king of the gods. The gods Bel and Ea, the lesser divinities, were given the number of 50 and 40 respectively. Anu, as a sky god, was a dweller in the celestial realms. When he occupied a throne in the northern sky, and since the god of the kings must have a queenly consort, he was provided with a wife, the goddess Antum. In an inscription written in Babylon by the king of Babylon about 1650 BC, the monarch was made to say the following prayer. He said, "May Anu and Atum, who live in heaven, send a blessing on Agum, the good king, who built the sanctuaries of Marduk and freed them from obligation of the workmen." Several eminent scholars have contended that sun worship was probably the earliest form of astral theology. The preeminence of the sun as the fountainhead of life and man's well-being, we are told, must have rendered it at a date almost contemporaneous with the birth of the race, the chief object of man's worship. The fact is that the sky god was the oldest of the celestial deities, whereas the stellar and lunar, that's the stars and the moon, the stellar and the lunar and solar divinities were a later development. Sun cults were the great import of religious history of early man. But solar worship was nevertheless a large stage in the evolution of natural theology. Solar worship was not universal, nor was it essentially basic, was a considered judgment of Dr. Weil. The Chinese did not worship the sun. No actual solar cult existed in Oceania, although rivers connects with megaliths of Oceania with the soul cult. So some rivers were connected to the sun cult. The belief of the stellar cults was taken over by the sun cult, it says. The research of Sir Norman Lockyer and Sir Wallace Budge have shown that the priority of star worship of the Nile Valley. The pyramids of northern Egypt were oriented east to west, and that is towards the sun. Obviously the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So he says the earlier pyramids were kind of aligned to the sun. While in southern Egypt, the more ancient step pyramids faced southeast, with such an amplitude that it could not have been a question of the sunlight entering the shrine. We are driven, therefore, to state that it was star worship. Some important temples on the south of Egypt and of Ethiopia were oriented, yet aligned to the Alpha Centauri, which is a stellar sign. One of the brilliant shining stars of the southern skies is Canopus, which figures brilliantly or prominently in the stellar worship of ancient Egypt. The findings of Lockyer relating to the ancient star worship of the Nile Valley have been briefly summarized by a noted student of ancient astronomy. So he says, Lockyer tells us of a series of temples at Edfu, Philae and Armada were so oriented at their erection to 6,400 BC, as shown by canopus heralding the sunrise at the autumnal equinox, when it is known that the symbol of Khons, the first southern star god, and the other similar temples later. At least two of the great structures at Karnak is in Upper Egypt, around 2000 BC and 1700 respectively, pointed to its setting, and as another did in Naga, which is in Kush, built by Ramses III around 1300 BC, were restored and enlarged under the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies are the Greek rulers of Egypt. So it is thus probably that the prominent object of religion in southern Egypt was the gods of the waters. That would be the Nile. That the worship of the moon is of a greater antiquity than that of the sun is a fact that calls for some explanation. In fact, it was reportedly or repeatedly noted by Dr. Bruford, that the cults of the lunar deities, this is the moon deities, occupy the early phase of religion, is a far more important place than those of any other deities. If the fact has long been overlooked, it is owing to the assumption that religious ideas have arisen as philosophical interpretations of the universe. Where this is the case, the sun will naturally occupy the first place among natural objects as the most conspicuous image of the powers of the ruling human destiny. Since religion did not, however, originate as a philosophical system, but as a practice of magic and mythology, those considerations are irrelevant and misleading. In the point of fact, the interpretations given rise to solar cults and mythologies do not make their appearance until relatively advanced stages of culture. So Dr. Bruford works are brilliantly polemic, and especially his 3-volume work is called The Mothers. So let me turn over, excuse me. So we're talking about the divine, the heavenly worship. Excuse me. It seems that the greatest of the Nile sun gods was Ra, or Re, so R-A-R-R-E, who was a personification of the physical sun. For indeed Ra was the ordinary, everyday Egyptian name for the sun. So the Egyptians just called the sun Ra, just the sun itself. Ra was part of the solar trinity, the other members being Osiris and Horus. As a solar divinity, Ra was usually depicted with as a hawk-headed man, holding a scepter in his hand and a cross, the crux ansata, in the other hand. So that is the ankhs, if you know what the ankh cross looks like. On his head was a globe or disc, and around it was a asp, a snake was coiled around this sun disc, the serpent being emblematic of the power of life and death. The image of Ra and the disc on his head was generally painted red, since the deity was particularly associated with the heat of the midday sun. Osiris, on the other hand, was symbolic of the setting sun. Osiris, as a dweller among men, assumed the form of a bull called Apis, and as a judge of the dead, he was depicted as a mummy and a sacred blue color, armed with a rod of authority and a cross of life, and adorned with the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. His eldest son, called Horus, his correct name is Heru, but in the books it would be called Horus, what the Greeks called him. So his eldest son, Horus, was the rising sun, who slew the dragon of darkness with a spear, i.e. a ray of sunlight, a spear. Another among the Egyptian solar divinities was Amen. We all say Amen, or many people in Christian faith say Amen at the end of their prayers. Amen was actually a god from ancient Egypt. So Amen, or Ammon, as he was a personification of the sun after he descended below the western horizon and was thus hidden from sight. So Amen was imaged as a man with the head and horns of a ram, and his pictures and statues were painted blue, the sacred color of the source of life. Some people say blue is to do with purity, like water. In the Egyptian language, the word ram means concealment. That's why Amen is sometimes called the hidden one. So the solar god Amen was the concealed one, the hidden one, an appropriate title for the sun after it disappeared in the western sky and descended into the underworld. So they believe that when the sun sets and nighttime comes, they believe that the sun is to travel through the underworld. And the underworld is the world of where Osiris, we'll speak about a bit more later on, is where Osiris lived. So in Thebes, which is in Upper Egypt, which is further to the south of Egypt, in Thebes the cults of Ammon and Ra were consolidated, and the sun was therefore worshipped under the name Amen-Ra. Solarism reached its zenith, i.e. its high spot, in Egypt during the reign of Akhenaten is also called Amenhotep IV. For this sovereign, this king, this pharaoh, forbade the worship of all other deities, which is not exactly true, but it's what the book says, of all other deities except the great living disk of the sun. He ordered the names of all the other gods to be erased from the monuments and decreed that their images should be destroyed. This worship of the solar disk under the name of Aten came to an end after the death of this king, and all the old gods returned to their temples. So Ra, Osiris, all returned to his temple. But for a time, he said that everybody should worship God under the symbol of Aten, which was the sun disk. Among the minor Egyptian sun gods were called Ptah, an embodiment of the life-giving power of the sun, and also another one called Mandu, who personified the power of the midday sun of summer, and even the rays of the solar orb were deified under the names Gon, Khons, and Moni. These are all symbols, these are all called sons of the sun. That is the S-O-N of the S-U-N. The Sumerians adorned a sun god called Aru, or Babar, whom the later Semitic Babylonians adopted and worshipped under the name Shamash. The ancient cylinder seals, or on ancient cylinder seals, this sun god is shown travelling across the sky on foot. But later on, it was considerably provided with a chariot drawn by two fiery horses. Shamash was pictured as an old man with a long beard and with sunbeams irradiating from his shoulders. His emblem was a four-pointed star within a round disc, with flickering flames between the 2 points of the star. In the Babylonian firmament, that is the sky, in the Babylonian firmament were two doors, one to the east and the other to the west. In the morning, Shamash came behind the dome of heaven and passed through the eastern door. Then, after pausing at the summit of the mountain of sunrise, at the edge of the world, he began his daily journey across the sky. In the evening, he arrived at the mountain of the sunset, and then he disappeared through the western door into the underworld. The Babylonian solar demigod was considered important as was Gilgamesh, whose exploits known in the Epic of Gilgamesh were inscribed on 12 tablets. Noteworthy, says F.J. Gold, is that the heroic legend of Gilgamesh, whose 12 adventures mark him out as a solar demigod, passing through the zodiacal episodes, slaying the lion, wooed by the virgin Ishtar, sickening and wasting at the close of the journey, and renewing his glory in the new year. From Chaldea, the myth migrated to Phoenicia, where the hero took the form of Melkarth. Thence, another brings up Heracles of the Greece. So Heracles, obviously this is a Greek god, Heracles is best known to the modern world as Hercules, the Latin form of the Greek name. Most students of mythology should be familiar with the story of the 12 labors of Hercules. For Hercules is a personification of the sun, and his 12 labors is an allegory of the passage of the sun through the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Before proceeding further, we must say something about the signs and the constellations of the zodiac. To prevent any confusion concerning this matter, we direct our attention of the reader of an authoritative explanation of the same, given by an eminent mathematician and astronomer. So he says, it is necessary to make a distinction between the signs of the zodiac and the constellations of the zodiac. Each sign is exactly 30 degrees long, 1/12 of the complete zone. And the first sign, Aries, begins with the vernal equinoxes. That is, the sun always enters the sign of Aries as it passes through the vernal equinoxes. It then traverses Taurus, Gemini, Cancer at the summer solstice. The summer solstice is the longest day. After which it traverses through Leo and Virgo and enters Libra as it passes through the autumnal equinoxes. The sun then travels the 6 signs south of Aries again when he arrives at the vernal equinox. The 12 groups of stars, the constellations, within the boundaries of the 12 signs originally had the same names as the signs, and each constellation would remain forever within a corresponding sign. If the vernal equinoxes did not move among the stars. However, Hipparchus, I think is a Greek scholar, discovered in 125 BC that the vernal equinoxes is not a fixed point in the sky, but that it slowly slips towards along the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the opposite of the equator. So always the equator goes one way around the Earth. The ecliptic goes the opposite way around the Earth, yeah, over the top. So this movement of the equinoxes, which is called the precescent speed, causes them to make a complete circuit of the sky in 26,000 years. Excuse me. And thus the constellation of the zodiac remain fixed, but the signs slip steadily westward. The sign of Aries, now in the constellation of Pisces, every sign having backed into the constellation west of it over the last 2,000 years. The signs of the constellation of the zodiac coincided around 300 BC, and also about 26,000 BC. We know that they were in use before 300 BC. They must therefore have been invented not later than 26,000 BC. The thing is here, I interrupt, is that if something was started 20,000 BC, people had to have studied it for many thousands of years before that to know that it started in 26,000 BC. So it goes on. The Greek writer Hesiod says that Arcturus rises at sunset 50 days after the winter solstice. In our calendar, this date will be February the 19th. The bright star now rises at sunset in Greece on March the 10th. From the known rate of the shift in the constellations of the zodiac, we can determine that Hesiod lived around 2800 BC. So we move on. The solar zodiac can be traced back to Egypt. So I interrupt here. The Egyptians were the earliest astronomers, yeah? Egyptians and the Kushites, because Egypt is a colony of Kush. So what is the Sudan today? These are the people who created ancient Egypt, yeah? And the correct name is Kemet. So the solar zodiac can be traced back to Egypt, where it was known at a very remote period of time. But the solar zodiac was preceded by a lunar zodiac, which was divided into 27 or 28 lunar mansions instead of the 12 signs. So although the zodiac is now determined by the course of the heavens, apparently pursued by the sun in his annual journey through the sky, we are told by Arthur Harding it is very probable that it was originally determined path of the moon, which follows very closely the path of the sun, and which can be observed at the time or the same time as the stars. The moon moves eastward among the stars at such a rate that it accomplishes a complete circuit of the sky in about 28 days. And if I interrupt, I think you know that every 28 days is a new moon, yeah? So the moon in 28 days completes a complete cycle. So since the lunar month is between 27 and 28 days, the lunar mansions were sometimes listed as 27 or 28 days. The lunar mansions are sometimes listed as 27, although 28 was the usual figure. The Hindus, obviously in India, had a lunar zodiac of 27 mansions, whereas the Chinese and Arabs had 28. The symbolism of the zodiac is eloquently displayed in the myth of Hercules. Of all the ancient divinities, to cite Edward Carpenter, perhaps Hercules is the one whose role as a sun god is most generally admitted. The helper of gods and men, a mighty traveller, evoked everywhere as a saviour. His labours for the good of the world became ultimately defined and systematized as 12, corresponding to number of the sign of the zodiac. The myth of Hercules was known to the Sumerians, Phoenicians, the Greeks. Herodotus speculated that on its origin was traced back to the Egyptians. There is no god named Hercules in the official pantheon of Egypt, but the ancient Greek tradition identified Hercules with the ancient Nilotic deity Khonsu. St. George St. Clair, in the scholarly study of Egyptian mythology, after discussing the better-known gods of ancient Egypt, directs our attention to a small group of deities standing apart. So George St. Clair says, these are Amen, Mut, and Khons. So this is a trinity, because Amen is a man, Mut, which means mother, is the mother, is the goddess, and Khonsu is their son. So these are Amen, Mut, and Khons, often spoken of as a triad of Thebes, or the triad of Ethiopia. So let me say, Ethiopia in the ancient world wasn't Ethiopia today. The Ethiopia of the ancient world, our ancient Greeks, is what we call Sudan today. It's also called Kush or even Nubia. So Budge tells us that the Theban triad had nothing whatsoever to do with the Book of the Dead. And from this, we may suspect that they were either gods newly come up or gods of foreign derivation. For some good reason, the Orthodox Egyptians of the old school kept them out of their sacred books, because they were the divinities of Thebes, and that city was 100 miles south of basically what is Karnak, which is Cairo today. They were the trinity of Ethiopia, or not of Egypt. So he's saying that the trinity, the most ancient trinity of Egypt, is a Kushite, Ethiopian trinity. In the myth of Hercules, the sun, of which Hercules is the personification, begins the zodiacal journey in the constellation of Leo, the lion. So the first labor of Hercules was the slaying of the lion. So this is all mythology. After killing the lion, the hero flayed the beast and used his skin thereafter as a shield. The lion skilled has been compared with the tawny clouds which sun trails behind him as he fights his way through the vapors, which he eventually overcomes. When the sun enters Virgo, the constellation of Hydra sets, and thus the second labor of Hercules was the destruction of the Hydra, which I think if you've seen the mythological thing, Jason the Argonauts, I think it has many snakes on their head, the Hydra. Okay, so I'm leaving. So that is about the nature of worship. So I'm gonna have a quick drink here for the moment, but I think you can see that religion started in 3 areas. Number 1, worship of heavenly bodies. Number 2, the worship also of the nature, vegetation, and the earthly bodies. But also, which part I didn't talk about there, was also reproduction. Yeah, so sexual reproduction, new life, and things like that. So I'm just going to take a quick drink, and then we'll proceed. So now I'm going to talk about Osiris. Spoke about Osiris a little while ago. Osiris was initially a moon goddess, yeah? He's associated with the setting sun, but he was a deity of the moon. Because what the ancient people used to do, our ancestors in particular, because they were the first astronomers, they'd look at what's happening on the earth and then look what's happening in the sky and link them both together. So the familiar role of Osiris was that of a god of the dead. Among his titles were the ruler of the dead, the Lord of the underworld and the Lord of eternity. On the monuments, he is shown occupying the judgment seat, armed with the staff of authority and holding the crux ansata, so that is a ankh, in his hand. Carved on the breast of Osiris is a St. Andrew's cross. So the cross looks like an X. You see on the chest of Osiris. The correct name for Osiris is Osar. That's what the African people call it, but in the books we'll call it Osiris, yeah, because they will take the Greek version of the word. So it goes on. Osiris likewise shone like a moon god. That this deity was sometimes identified with the moon, we know from the fact that he was on occasion depicted as a mummy wearing on his head a crescent moon symbol in place of his usual crown. Plutarch, which is a kind of a Greek-Roman writer, in his book, The Isis Osiris, discusses the theory that Osiris was the moon. Because the moon, he says, was humid and generated light, and it was favorable to the propagation of animals and the growth of plants, while the sun, with its fierce fire, scorches and burns up all growing things, and it renders the greater part of the earth uninhabitable by reason of the blaze, and it often overpowers the moon itself. Since that was the Greek writer, yeah? But as we know, the vegetation needs the sun to grow as well. Osiris is said to have reigned for 28 years as ruler of Egypt. Osiris in mythology is said to be the first ruler of Egypt. This may be taken as allusion to the 28 days of the lunar month. The rending of the body of Osiris into 14 pieces by Set and his fellow conspirators refers to the waning moon, which was imagined to lose a portion of itself on each of the 14 days in the second half of the lunar month. In the myth, Set finds the body of Osiris at the time of the full moon. The dismemberment of the latter Osiris's body began with the waning moon. So if I give you a quick idea of the story, Set and Osiris were brothers, and because Set was jealous of Osiris, he wanted to sit on the throne of Egypt, he killed Osiris and cut his body into 14 pieces. And what they're saying here in the mythology to show that Osiris was linked with the moon, they're saying that the 14 pieces represents halfway through the lunar month, 14 days. Because you know, you get full moon, and then after 14 days it goes to a crescent moon, and then it gets larger and larger again, and comes to a full moon again. So he's saying that the story is the mythology talking of the moon, how it goes down to a crescent moon, and then comes for a full moon again. I'm going to continue. The spring season in ancient Egypt began with the new moon of the month called Faminoth. At this time in the temples, a ceremony was celebrated called the entry of Osiris into the moon. At the ceremony, the burial of Osiris, his worshippers constructed a crescent-shaped chest because of the moon. As it approaches the sun, assumes a crescent, and then it vanishes altogether. So again, the ancient Egyptians, because of their brilliance in astrology, the heavens really affected their culture. And we can see so many things in their culture linked to the sun, linked to the moon, and linked to the stars. And we'll see that as we continue. So let me just turn over this page. So Osiris' son was called Horus. So Horus is pictured in 4 seams. I'll come back to that one, okay? Okay. So I'm going to read another book by John G. Jackson, and this one is called Introduction to African Civilizations. So it goes on, and this will give you more ideas about the solar mythology and the mythology around it, and we can see is linked to Christianity, because by reading this you'll see where Christianity actually, remember we spoke about the quote from St. Augustine said that this religion was always there, and then when it came again in flesh it was called Christianity. So what I'm going to read now gives you an idea of the religion that St. Augustine was already talking about, which was there some 5,000 years before Christianity started. So in other words, the stellar symbolism of the zodiac was based on a still more ancient symbolism. When the agriculturalists, i.e. the farmers, of the archaic civilization of Africa, who were faced with the problem of determining the proper seasons for planting their crops by observing the motions of the stars, they projected the animal symbols of the totem of the hunters or into the zodiac of the signs of the zodiacs. Excuse me, of the sky, into the sky. The zodiacal symbolism, which we have been discussing, is closely connected with the rites and ceremonies of the great religious systems of both ancient and modern. For instance, in Egypt some 3,000 years ago, the birthday of the sun god was celebrated in the temples on the 25th of December. I hope you listen to this. Remember, this is some 3,000 years before Christianity and the Jesus Christ. So the symbolism we have been discussing is closely connected with the rites and ceremonies of the great religious systems, both ancient and modern. For instance, 3,000 years ago in Egypt, the birthday of the sun god was celebrated in the temples on the 25th of December. It was the first day to lengthen, obviously, after December the 21st, the day of the winter solstice. At the midnight hour, on the very first minute of the 25th of December, the birth of the sun was commemorated. At that time, the sun was in the zodiacal sign of Capricorn, which was known as the stable of Aegeus. So the infant sun god was said to have been born in a stable. Shining brightly on the meridian was Sirius, the star in the east, whilst rising in the east was Virgo, the Virgin, the line of the horizon passing through her centre. To the right of Sirius was Orion. Orion is a constellation known as a great hunter, with 3 stars in his belt. These stars lie in a straight line and point towards Sirius, i.e. the star in the east. And in ancient times, they were known as the 3 kings. We meet them in the Gospels of the 3 wise men, or magi. In the zodiac, on the interior of the dome of the Temple of Dendera, so this is the Temple of Dendera in ancient Egypt, the constellation of Virgo was pictured as a woman with a spike of corn in one hand, and the margin of the Virgin is denoted by the figure of Isis, of her name the Horus. So I think you can see there, guys, it says here the birthday of the sun god was celebrated on the 25th of December. At that midnight hour, the first minute of December, the birth of the sun was commemorated. At that time, the sun was in the zodiacal sign of Capricorn, which was known as the stable of Aegeus. So the infant son was said to be born of a stable. At that time also in the eastern meridian was Sirius, the star of the east, while rising in the east was the constellation of Virgo, the Virgin. And the line of the horizon passes through her center. And to the right of Sirius was Orion, who was known, a constellation known as the Great Hunter. And he's got a belt, and within his belt contains 3 stars. And the 3 stars were known as the 3 kings. So I think you can see there, guys, very simply, we have the birth of a sun in a stable, a star in the east, a virgin, and 3 wise men. I'm pretty sure you've seen that. So it is well known, I'm continuing reading here, and this is by Edward Carpenter says this, it is well known matter of history that the worship of Isis and Horus descended into the early Christian centuries to Alexandria, which is in Egypt, here on the coast by the Mediterranean Sea, where it took the form of the worship of the Virgin Mary and the infant Saviour, and so passed into European ceremonial. So we have therefore the Virgin Mary connected with by linear succession and descent with the zodiacal cluster in the sky. A curious confirmation of the same astronomical connection is afforded by the Roman Catholic calendar, for if this is consulted, it will be found that the festival of the Assumption of the Virgin be placed on the 15th day of August, while the festival of the birth of the Virgin is dated to the 8th of September. At the present day, the zodiacal sign are into procession that has shifted some distance from the constellation of the same name. Excuse me. But at the same time, when the zodiac was constituted, that these names were given, the first date obviously would signalize the Assumption of the Virgin into the glory of God, while the second date would signalize the reappearance of the constellation of the birth of the Virgin. The church at Notre Dame, which is Notre Dame is Paris, the church of Notre Dame is supposed to be on the original site of a temple of Isis, and it is said that in brackets got here, but I have not been able to verify this myself, that one side of the entrances is namely on the left side entering from the north, and it is figured with the sign of the zodiac, except that the sign of Virgo is replaced by the figure of Madonna and Child. So the church in Notre Dame in Paris is actually on the site which used to be the temple of Isis. So Paris is named after the African goddess. Paris Isis means the grove or temple of Isis. So Paris is named after the Isis, which became in Christianity the Virgin. I'm continuing here. At the winter solstice, Christmas, the sun is at its southernmost position in the celestial sphere. After that date, it begins to travel northwards along the ecliptic, and at the vernal equinox, which is Easter, it passes over the celestial equator. This passing of the sun from the south to the north of the equator was the origin of the festival of the Passover. When the sun reached its equinoctial point and crossed over or passed over the equator some 3,000 years ago, it was situated in Aries, the lamb or the ram. So the lamb became the symbol of the god. Here we have a clue to the origin of the Passover lamb, which has been widely regarded as a type of the crucified Christ. If the reader should consult such books as The World's 16 Crucified Saviours by Kersey Graves, or Bible Myths by T.W. Doane, he will find out that several pagan sun gods were said to have been crucified. The meaning of this solar crucifixion has been explained in a scholarly manner by Gordon Rylance. So he says, on the astronomical chart, the sun is apparently crucified upon the intersecting lines of the equator and the ecliptic, which actually makes a cross, at the moment of the descent into the lower hemisphere, the hemisphere of darkness and death, and it is so again at the moment of the resurrection of the hemisphere of light and life, while the period of transit is 3 days, at the time when the myth of the death of the sun god originated. The sun being in the constellation of Aries at the spring equinox was blessed by the ram, was identified by the ram. And this is the lamb which has been slain from the foundation of the world. The custom of dressing this lamb in the shape of a cross is referable to the same myth. And this is from the book The Beginnings of Gnostic Christianity. So I think you can maybe see there, guys, that what we know as Christianity, it can be linked to extraterrestrial movements, yeah? The movements of the heavens, stars, the sun, the moon, and the constellation, the stellar phenomenon in the sky as well. Okay? So, and as you may have heard there, one of those writers spoke about, a book was called The 16 Crucified Saviors by Kersey Graves. There's at least in history, if you go back in history, there's at least about 30 crucified saviors. The oldest one is Osiris, the African one, the Egyptian one. And the youngest one is Jesus. So of these maybe 30 crucified saviors, the youngest one is actually Jesus, but the oldest is the African one, yeah, is in Egypt. So if I move on, we have already discussed the myths and rites of Osiris. But Finley has brought to our attention certain facts that are not discussed at length by the standard authorities of the religion of ancient Egypt. The Pharaoh Seti I of the 19th dynasty. So let me just say quickly, in Egypt there was 30 families. Each family was called a dynasty. Yeah. So the first dynasty, that's the first king of Egypt. Yeah. So in the 19th dynasty, so this is the 19th ruling family, the king was called Seti I, and he caused to be erected a temple in a place called Abydos. Abydos is very important. I'm stopping here for a moment because in Abydos we find the first people we used to go to. You know, a lot of people go to Mecca now, and they go to the Holy Land in Bethlehem. Be thousands of years before there was a Mecca, and before anybody knew about Bethlehem, people used to go on a pilgrimage to Abydos, because Abydos was said to be the birthplace of Osiris. But the pharaoh, the king, Seti I, he built a temple in Abydos. It was an impressive structure, and it's still standing today, and it contains chapels, halls, and several principal sanctuaries where the image of God will be. The walls are embellished with reliefs in colour, and if you go there today, you can't believe how bright the colours is, and this is like some 3,000 years old. So the walls are embellished with colour and fine examples of Egyptian sculpture. Directly behind the temple is situated the Osirion, which is a large subterranean hall, so it goes up with an underground passage. This underground structure was carved out of sandstone, and the roof is supported by large granite pillars. This hall contained an artificial island in the midst of a body of water. On the island is a hill, which the sun god was imagined to stand, and who at sunrise touched the land with his life-giving beams. This hill symbolized the resurrection of the rising sun, overcoming the darkness of evil, and hence symbolizing victory of life over death. Because in ancient Egypt, I'm interjecting here, the people are extremely symbolic. And every day when the sun rose, they believe it overcome darkness, the evil. And when it rose with its light, that is like, resurrection, they said, of the sun, because they say the sun overcome death. So I'm continuing. The hill symbolized the resurrection of the rising sun overcoming the devil of darkness, and hence symbolizing the victory of life over death. Because this hall may have been a sarcophagus, like a false tomb, this tomb originally supposed to be the burial site of Osiris, but the initiates of Egyptian mysteries knew that the body had been interred, i.e. buried, elsewhere. In the ancient Passion play, where the scenes of the arrest, trial, death, burial, and resurrection of Osiris. So in one scene, the onlookers would observe the body, supposedly that of Osiris being buried in the tomb. The next act showed the opening of the tomb, which was seen to be empty. The next and the final scene showed Osiris alive again, following his resurrection from the dead. In ancient Egypt, there were two bodies, of religious doctrine. The exoteric, which was known by the common people, and the esoteric, which was known only by the sacred people. These are like the secrets doctrines, and is normally taught within symbols. The meaning of the false tomb has been so explained by Finley, and this is what Finley, the writer Finley, says. He says, so that the people could realize that Osiris had conquered the grave, it was necessary for the tomb to be emptied. It was the only way to impress on them the fact that the Lord had risen. It was impossible for the audience to see him lying in the tomb and the dead body of Osiris and his spirit body standing beside it. So the only way that this event could be dramatized was by showing the empty tomb, or showing the tomb as empty. This symbolism conveyed to the people the idea of resurrection from the dead, and it was perpetuated when this temple was erected by the empty rock tomb in which it was assumed that the body of Cyrus had been laid. It was there no longer because he had conquered the grave. We can now understand the mystery of an empty tomb related to the gospel narratives. The writers made use of the Egyptian symbolism taken from their passion play and told the story just as it happened on the stage of the corpse being put into a rock tomb and not being there when the disciples revisited the grave. So now that we know that the gospel record of the empty tomb was probably taken from the Egyptian passion drama, all our difficulties disappear, and what appears to be the absurd and impossible becomes understandable. So I hope you can see there that Osiris, because remember it speaks about the exoteric and the esoteric. So the exoteric is the common people who don't really understand the myth. So they had to show the symbolism and the myth of this God rising from the death, overcoming death and resurrecting, But the esoteric stuff, the people in the know, that the priests of this temple, they knew that this wasn't a true story. They knew that it was symbolic of what's happening in the heavens, That the sun overcome the evil, They know that it wasn't a true story. And even, remember, St. Augustine said, and he was a Christian father, so he knows much more than many of us, that this religion always existed, and we are seeing now that this religion really existed. But the people who knew the religion, the esoteric teachings, knew that it wasn't Osiris was never really flesh. It's symbolism and allegory to tell a certain truth within symbolism. Okay? But it comes down to us today in Christianity, because Jesus was put in flesh, but he was only creating flesh around 325 BC at the Nicene Conference. So we can touch on that a bit later on. But initially, it was actually flesh. And let me give you another idea that there are other crucified saviors, I'm sure many of you have heard of Krishna, Krishna of India. So another great Christ, they say pagan Christ, but you must remember, Christianity was once a pagan religion. And all religions are pagan, but to the people who worship them, they're not pagan. They're only pagan to people who don't worship these religions, So another great pagan Christ was Krishna of India. For it is recorded in the sacred book of India that Krishna was born of a virgin called Devaki. And at his nativity it was heralded by a star. And through the royal lineage he was born in a cave. According to the gospel at work attributed to James, the brother of Jesus, the Christian Savior was also born in a cave. So some of the early stories of Jesus Christ, he was actually born in a cave as well. At the time of Christ's birth, the cave was mysteriously illuminated, and likewise at the birth of Jesus, there was such a great light in the cave that the eyes of Joseph and the midwife could not bear it. The infant Krishna spoke to his mother immediately after his birth. Jesus spoke even when he was in the cradle and said to his mother, Mary, I am Jesus, the Son of God. That word which thou didst bring forth according to the declaration of Abel Gabel to thee, and my Father have sent me for the salvation of the word. So I hope you can see the similarities here. It goes on. Krishna was born while his foster father, Nanda, was in the city to pay tax to the king. Jesus was born while his foster father, Joseph, was in the city to pay tax to the governor. King Kansa sought the life of the Indian Christ, Krishna, by ordering the massacre of all male children born during the same night as was Krishna. This parallel to the story of the slaughter of the innocents ordered by King Herod is recounted in the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 11, verses 16. Nanda was warned by a heavenly voice to flee with his infant Krishna child across the Juma River in order to escape the King Kansa. Joseph was warned by a voice in a dream to flee Egypt, or flee into Egypt with the Christ child, so as to escape from King Herod. In the city Mathura, which was his birthplace, Krishna performed many miracles. Jesus was in Egypt, lived in Mathura, town near Hermopolis, and whilst residing there, he wrought many miracles. Krishna, the second person of the Hindu Trinity, which is consisted of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Krishna was the human incarnation of Vishnu. Jesus Christ is considered to be the second person of the Christian Trinity according to the Bible. Krishna was said to have been crucified, said to be a crucified Christ. He is pictured in Indian art as hanging from a cross with his arms extended. Dr. Thomas Inman states that Krishna, whose history closely resembles our Lord's, was also like him being crucified. Krishna, while hanging on a cross, was pierced by an arrow. During his crucifixion, Jesus was pierced by an arrow. The light of the sun was blotted out at noon on the day of Krishna's death. The sun was said to have been darkened on the 6th to the 9th hour on the day of the crucifixion of Jesus. This darkness of the Passover of the Passion of Christ called forth a commentary from historian Edward Gibbon, and it's become a very famous one. And put simply, he speaks about the similarities. So how do we account for the similarities? Krishna is 1,000, maybe 1,500 years before the Jesus of Christ, but as you can see, the stories are virtually identical. How do we account for this? But remember, as I said to you before, St. Augustine said that this religion always existed from the beginning. And the reason why it existed from the beginning, because it came from study of the heavens and study of nature. And they put these together and created these stories. So Krishna descended into hell to raise the dead before returning to the abode of the gods. And on his return from the infernal regions, he brought with him 2 boys, whom were restored to their parents on earth. In the New Testament Apocrypha, we read that Jesus descended into hell, and leading back unto the earth a party of saints, among them 2 sons of the high priest, whom the Christ restored to life on earth. So for details of the story of descent into hell of Jesus Christ, the interested reader are referred to the Apocrypha called the Gospel of Nicodemus. So let me move on. I'm going to give you some more information about the study of the heavens and how it links to religion of today. And this is really from, this is all about really about the 25th of December. And we can see a lot of the things what happened today, they happened in the ancient world. And what they come down to today really are copies of what used to happen in the ancient world. So, many of us have been raised to believe, as an article of faith, of that Christian religion, that Jesus Christ was born on the 25th of December, or Christmas Day. But not many of us are aware that on the ancient Kemetic Egyptian origins of the 25th of December festival, and remember I mentioned to you a bit earlier, or what it truly represents, and the fact that it's nothing to do with the Christian religion or Christmas. In fact, December the 25th is not, nor has it ever been, the birthday of Jesus Christ, the Christian God. So the verifiable facts, historical facts around the 25th of December are as follows. In Egypt, Kemet is the correct name, 3,000 years ago, the birthday of the sun god Ra was celebrated in temples on the 25th of December, as I said earlier. It was the first day to lengthen, obviously, after the 25th of December, which is the shortest day of the year, called the winter solstice. So please understand, let me say to you, that the ancient Egyptians have always believed in a one supreme God, always. And they've stated this in all their writings, yeah? And particularly in the book, which some people call it the Book of the Dead, but the correct name, what the ancients called it, who wrote it, called it the Book of Coming Forth from Darkness into Life, as in when the sun rises. And it's written in revised state maybe 6,000 years ago. Nevertheless, they believed that the spirit of life from the Creator existed in all things, and that they therefore honoured this manifestation of the Creator's life force in the sun, which they called Ra. So they wasn't actually worshipping the sun, they were worshipping the creative force, which they believe resides in everything. And this is really African spirituality. In African spirituality, the Creator's essence is in everything. In African spirituality, nothing exists except for the Creator. So I continue. On the midnight hour, on the very first minute of the 25th, the birth of the sun is commemorated. Beginning with the 21st, the period of sunlight on each day increased, and thus the sun appeared to have been born again from the short periods of daylight that preceded it. So for 4 days, the sun goes down, 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 and it looks like it's kind of getting smaller and smaller. But after 3 days after the 21st, on the 25th, this is the first day where the sun looks like it's being born again. At this time, the sun was in the zodiacal sign of Capricorn, which is known as the stable, as you know. Shining brightly on the meridian was a star in the east. And the sign of Virgo, the constellation of Virgo, was also there as well. So we have the three kings on the line of Orion's belt as well. This accounts for the origin of the sun festival of ancient Egypt on the 25th of December. But how did this festival get translated into Christmas, or the Christian event called Jesus? The birth of Jesus has been said at Christmas, but up until the 4th century, the birth of the Christian Saviour was celebrated on the 6th of January. And this can be, remember, this can be verified. Certain that it was the winter solstice, which was assigned on the 25th of December, was celebrated in antiquity as the birthday of the sun, and the festal lights or fires were kindled in joyous occasion. So on the birth of the sun, they used to light lights, yeah, like a festival of lights. The Christian festival is a continuation or a corruption under the Christian name of this festival, of his old solar festival. For the ecclesiastical authorities saw fit, about the end of the 3rd century or beginning of the 4th century, to arbitrarily to transfer the nativity of Jesus from the 6th of January to the 25th of December, for the purpose of diverting to their Lord the worship and recognition which was ancient Egyptians paid to the sun on this day. So I hope you understand that. Jesus' original birthday was the 25th, or my apologies, was the 6th of January. But the church powers that be, the ecclesiastical authorities, saw fit to change the birth of Jesus to the 25th of December. So aside, Christmas celebration on 6th of January was also known as the Old Christmas. So Christians don't really know this, but really, Christianity is really sun worship. Now, I know many Christians here will say, well, what are you talking about? You must be talking rubbish. Some of you might even be hanging up, but let me bear with me, yeah? I've got a little quote in here from a book I'm writing, okay? I've got a little paragraph here, so you get a bit of a sneak preview. So the Bible itself points to the solar divinity of Jesus in a number of places, and I've only got a few of them here. So in the first chapter of the Gospel of John, it states, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And later it says, that was the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world. In the Gospel according to Matthew, the 70th chapter, it says, when Jesus went up the high mountain, i.e. sunrise, high mountain, we read he was transfigured. He metamorphosized, that is, i.e. changed into. He was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was as the light. This is the Bible now, you can check this yourself. Returning to the Gospel of John, chapter 7, he states, I am the light of the world. Interestingly, in John chapter 9, Jesus says, I must work the works of him who have sent me, while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So it's stated there, when it is night, the sun is not the light of the world, which is a clear indication that the words are allegorical rather than literal. Furthermore, in the Gospel of Luke, it states, when Jesus is said to have died, it is said that there was darkness all over the world. And these people who know the Bible know this. And when Mary Magdalene went to Jesus' tomb to clean and anoint the body, when did she go to the tomb? She went to anoint and clean the body just before sunrise. And in the book of Mark, Luke, and the Acts, it says Jesus rose up to the heavens to sit beside his Father, just like a sun rises up to heaven. So are the books talking of Jesus, or are they talking of the Son? Or are they one and the same thing? Only you can decide this. So let me continue. The ecclesiastical authorities, i.e. the church, Pope Julius I in the 4th century, he fixed December the 25th as the birthday of Christ. But we know that the Christ had no vital statistics. No one knew when the date of his birth. So what could have inspired Pope Julius I to choose that date? Unless it was the Egyptian tradition to perpetuate the Roman calendar. This becomes evidence when the idea of a tree is associated with the birth of Christ. That would seem arbitrarily if we did not know that Osiris, Osar is his correct name, remember, he was born on the 26th of December, but he was a deity, either god or the spirit of vegetation. Sometimes he was even painted green. So if you Google Osiris and images, you'll see Osiris as green sometimes because he's a vegetation. So he's showing you here the link to the tree, whose rebirth was symbolized by a symbol. His symbol was a tree with cut branches set up to announce his resurrection of life. So such could be the remote origin of the Christmas tree. Once again, on retracing the course of time, that more than one feature of Western civilization loses his enigmatic, i.e. his puzzling kind of character when it's linked to its ancient African source. Christmas tree, Osiris was the god of vegetation. In ancient Egypt, they used to put up trees in honor of him. And now, Jesus, we put up Christmas trees. So we can see that pagan, or things what are said to be pagan, are used within this religion, which is now called Christianity. Further, the nativity itself is an Egyptian import. In the temple of Ammon, remember Amen, in Luxor, which in ancient Egypt they call it Waset, was first built around 1700 BC, and there is a temple there, yeah? There is a panel of 4 pictures carved into stone depicting the birth of the infant Pharaoh. The temple scenes show all the essential elements of the ancient Egyptian birth of the infant Pharaoh. And that will put us 1700 years before, or 1700 years the alleged birth of Christ. Remember, nobody knows exactly when the one is born. but it's 700 years later be unfaithfully copied by the Christian event called Christmas. So what these 4 scenes show, remember these 4 scenes were drawn and painted into stone 1700 years before the alleged birth of Christ. In the first scene, we see the announcement. We see the impending birth by Thoth, who was a messenger of the Creator to the mother to be named. The mother's name was Mut Enwa, which means the mother of one. So this is the Christian Annunciation. So Mut Enwa, Thoth comes to her and says, "You're about to become pregnant." Holding the sacred ankh, the ankh is a symbol of life, Thoth holds the ankh up to her mouth and to her nose. And this is how she's impregnated. So this is the Immaculate Conception, i.e. also known as the Virgin Birth. And then the second scene, the mother is sitting in a birthing chair. And this is the birth of the child. And the last scene, we see the heavenly hosts. So we see lots of different heavenly beings or divine beings gathering around this child, paying homage to the child. But also we see 3 personages offering gifts to the new child, called the adoration of the new child. So these 3 personages giving gifts in the Christian religion are called the 3 wise men, who we've seen, if we use astrology, is the 3 stars in the belt of Orion. So in these 4 scenes, 1700 years before Christ, in ancient Egypt, I must add, we see the Annunciation, we see the Immaculate Conception, we see the birth, and we see the adoration of the child. So we have seen and documented how all the components of the ancient Egypt spiritual festival, including the 25th of December, the stable, the star in the east, the Virgin Mother, the 3 kings, the trees, the lights, the gift giving, and all the elements is what is now called a nativity. Thousands of years before there was a Jesus of Christ. So again, we going back to what the Christian father St. Augustine says, this religion always existed. So the Western culture, who really uses things, because what we see is really that they have taken our teachings, our philosophies, our mythologies, they've rewrapped it up themselves in their own image and sold it back to us. So why do they sell it back to us? They really sold it back to us to control us with this religion. And I'm just really telling the truth. And I'll read something a bit later on which shows you that there is some truth in this, okay? So what I want to do now really is give you a bit more idea about the Egyptian religion, yeah? The religion of the Nile Valley. So these are the people, or is the Sudan today, and the people of Egypt. So when people say to me today, well, Egypt's nothing to do with Africans. Egypt, they're Arabs, aren't they? But you have to understand, the people you see in Egypt today came in with Islam. That's why they're Arabic people. So these people are, it's just like if you went to what's called America today. The original people, the native people, were killed, unfortunately, by the Christians who went there. So when you see the people in the White House, these are not original people. These are Europeans who went there. Equally, when you look at Egypt, the people there are not the original people. The original people looks like me and you and any other African you could see. And we know that because everybody went there, said that they were black people, yeah? We've got at least 10 or 12 ancient Greeks and Romans saying, well, these people are black people. They've got black skin, woolly hair, broad nose, fleshy lips, yeah? So we know that. So when we speak about the Nile Valley religion, it's nothing to do with the people who are there now, who are kind of Arab and Muslim. These are the ancient Africans who were the astrologers and the creators of the spirituality, which is linked to astronomical phenomena, the terrestrial phenomena, nature, and also into fertility as well. So, Nile Valley religion. And it's very important to remember that the Nile Valley, the River Nile, is the longest river in the world. It is 4,100 miles long, and it is 4,100 miles. It's one of the only rivers what flows from south to north. The high point of the two is the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The White Nile is in Ethiopia, and the Blue Nile is, my apologies, the Blue Nile is in Ethiopia, and the White Nile starts at the Great Lakes around Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and around there. That is the beginning of the Nile. So the people of the Nile Valley traveled from that region, from Uganda, all the way up into ancient Egypt, through Nubia, through Kush, and they're the people who created the ancient Egyptian ancient civilization, who built the pyramids, who were the astrologers, who were the physicians, who were the scientists of the ancient world, okay? The Nile has been called the world's first cultural highway. So the ancient Egyptians said themselves that they came from Uganda, Kenya. They said they came down where the Nile begins, okay? So moving on very quickly. The Nile Valley. So this is from a book by Tony Browder. And Tony Browder has written a book called The Nile Valley Contributions to Civilizations. So from the beginning of time, the Africans have always had a belief in a one God, a self-created, all-powerful God. Upon observing the wonders of the universe, man began to see the many manifestations of the one creator, reflected in all that existed, and identified them as aspects of the one. So in ancient, or in Nile Valley, ancient Egypt and ancient Kush, they called God Necha. Maybe it's the origin of the word nature, but they call it Necha. So we spell it today Netcher, or some people call it Neter. So Necha means God, but all the aspects of God are also called Netchers. Okay, so this monotheism viewpoint saw everything as a part of the whole. So nature is not a God, it is an integral part of what is God. Similarly, a transmission is not an automobile, i.e. the gears, when we change the gears, but it is an essential component of a car, of that car itself. Yeah, and just like every other part is there. So good. So attempts to portray African religion as polytheistic or idolatry are as repugnant as those who seek to condemn it. Modern religion has angels, archangels, and messengers and saints who carry out the roles similar to those of the Netcharu. So Netcharu, we'll put a U on the end of Netcha, it means plural, many, yeah? So references to Jesus as the Christ, as the Lamb, is just an anthropomorphic, as Ammon being associated with the Lamb. So you see before that Ammon is associated with the ram, and sometimes they may have a lamb there or a ram there as a god. And people say, well, look, they're worshiping animals, but they're not worshiping animals. Equally, if Jesus is associated with the lamb, are we worshiping a lamb? So it's very the same thing. So people who maybe change the standard when they're looking at one religion and when they look at another religion, if you understand what I'm saying. So Anthony West provides a very excellent commentary about the fundamentals of the religion of Kemet, yeah, and Kush, which is Sudan and Egypt today, and world religion generally. So he says, Egyptian religion may be divided into two distinct but complementary intertwined themes: the creation of the universe, the creation of man, and his role in the universal scheme. The Egyptians, these Africans always remember, expressed their thought or their religious ideas through myth and symbolism, not through philosophical explanation. They use myth and symbolism. So in many ways, myth and symbol are superior means of expressing metaphysical concepts. But it's first necessary to be privy to the inner meaning of the symbolic language employed. So the keys to Egypt died with their religion, so that is why the subject is so prone to Christianity. So when it says they use myth and symbolism to describe their metaphysical concepts, metaphysical means more than physical, things that cannot be explained, religious things, spiritual things, yeah? Things that are not physical, what you can touch and what you can see. So if I move on, the late Professor Breasted considered the civilization to be the oldest in the world, and he dates the first dynasty. Remember I said Egypt divided into 30 dynasty? So he dated the first dynasty at 3400 BC. However, another British scholar, Flinders Petrie, equally, he said that the first dynasty was 4777 BC. So nearly 75,000 years before the birth of Christ. There is a discrepancy of nearly 2,000 years between these two. So how do we count for this? So Breasted studied for his doctorate degree in Egyptology under a German called Edward Meyer in the University of Berlin. Now, Edward Meyer, the professor, he was a Christian, and he assumed that the world began around 4400 BC. 4004 BC. So according to which is according to the biblical chronology. So Breasted, being studied under Meyer, adopted Meyer's chronology, and he criticized Petrie and other authorities for adopting an earlier date. The building of the Great Pyramid had begun during the Third Dynasty, and according to Petrie, the Third Dynasty was 4200 BC to 3998 BC. So if these dates were correct, the Great Pyramid were erected before the creation of the world itself, according to the Christian chronology. So Breasted dates for the Third Dynasty are 2900, and this fits into biblical tradition. So when people are dating ancient Egypt, sometimes most people say, oh, it's about 3000 BC, 2900 BC, because this is really in line with the Christian kind of dating. But this is inaccurate. Why do we say that? Because a ancient Egyptian scholar called Manetho, that is the Greek name, his correct name is Mer-en-Jehuti, but in Manetho, he was asked by one of the Greek rulers of Egypt to write a history of Egypt. And he went to the temples and used the sacred temple, all the doctrines there. So he went to the sacred archive, and he said that ancient Egypt started 5700 BC. Looking at the official history of the nation in the official royal archives of ancient Egypt. So we must go with that date, because that is the earliest possible date, which we know 5700 BC. But because a lot of people like to use the biblical chronology, that's why we see 3000 BC today, but that is very incorrect date. So the people of the Nile Valley were the first human beings to express a profound belief in the doctrine of an everlasting life. They preserved the bodies of their dead in an as yet undiscovered process of embalming, and entombed these bodies in elaborately inscribed funerary monuments. Prayers and litanies played a major role in preparing of the soul of the recently departed for their journey through the underworld, and which would guarantee them a safe place with God in the next world. The so-called Book of the Dead, which is the better name for it is a book of coming from darkness into light, was a compilation of the prayers that were inscribed on the walls of the tombs or written on papyrus scrolls, which were buried with the dead. These sacred pronouncements were discovered by the grave robbers who violated these tombs. Obviously they were looking for treasure, sadly, in search of fame and glory, and regarded these writings as the books of the dead. So according to Wallace Budge, one of the translators of the Book of the Dead, he said these texts were known to have existed in revised editions and to have been used among the Egyptians from about 4500 BC in the early centuries of the Christian era. My apologies. From about 4500 BC to the earliest centuries of the Christian era. So Budge admits that the correct name for the Book of the Dead is derived from the words Pert Em Heru, which means, when it's translated, book of coming forth by day, or book of coming from darkness into light. Why do they say that? If I give you an idea, it says that when you passed away and the Egyptians will be buried in the west, they said that you go into the underworld, and through the 12 hours of night you are judged, And if after the 12 hours of night you are judged to be true, honest, and a just person, they said that you was vindicated. When the sun would rise, you would rise with the sun. And that's why the book is called the Book of Coming Forth for a Day. They said you would travel up to heaven with the sun. In symbolism, they said the sun used to rise in a boat. So you'd have a boat you'd have a seat held for you in the boat of the sun, and you'd rise up to heaven. Obviously, this is just mythology and symbolism, but the idea is that your spirit will come in. This is in the spiritual world. Your spirit will rise up to the sun. Remember, this is some 5,700 BC, created from the people of the Nile Valley. Thousands of years, 6,000 years before there is a Jesus the Christ, or there is a Allah, or there is a Buddha, or anybody else mentioned. So this is the origin of religion. So the oldest religious text, where do we find the oldest religious text? The oldest religious text is found in the pyramids. There's a pyramid called the Pyramid as Yunus, and I've been there as well, in Egypt, and he is the last king of the 5th dynasty, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty. And in his tomb, where his body was laid, are writings on the wall, and these are called the pyramid text. And what do we find in the pyramid text? We see a conception of heaven, the soul of man going to heaven, the soul of man sitting on the throne on the side of God, the heavenly blessed eating from the tree of life, God molding man out of clay, God breathing the breath of life into man's nostrils, the concept of creation through spoken word, morals and concepts of good and evil, and tradition of hell and hellfire. Remember, these are all in the old religion of ancient Egypt, many thousands of years before we find them somewhere else in the world. So one of the most celebrated Neteru of all Kemet, i.e. this is a divine being, was Osar, which you know well by the Greek name Osiris. It has been written that at the time of his birth, a voice was heard to proclaim that the Lord of creation was born. The story of Osar is long and quite involved. He is recognized as a great mythical king of Egypt who brought civilization to his people and established a code of laws and instructions for their worship. He ruled Kemet with his wife Aset, which the Greeks will call her Isis. You may have heard her name as Isis. And he ruled her, from he ruled as the first king of Egypt. According to legend, Osiris was slain by his cunning brother who wanted to rule Egypt. What he did, because he wanted to kill his brother Osiris, because everybody loved Osiris, he called a party. And what he did, he had Osiris secretly measured, and he made a beautiful coffin. And at the party, whenever they obviously had a few drinks, he said to everybody at the party, "Look, I've got this beautiful coffin. I want everybody to try this coffin out, and whoever it fits beautifully, the coffin will be yours." So everybody tried the coffin because the coffin is so beautiful. But it was just a trick. So when Osiris tried the coffin, Set slammed shut the lid and nailed the lid shut with all these people, and he took the coffin and he threw it into the River Nile, and the coffin floated away to Egypt, and that's how he came to be illegally on the throne of Egypt. Okay, so later on, it's a long story, but Isis found the body and hid the body in the marshes. But Set, he was out hunting during the night time, surprise, surprise, and he found the body, and this is one we spoke about earlier. He took the body and cut it into 14 pieces. So this is symbolism about the moon of 14 days, 14 pieces, the waning moon, and then he got the moon. So that's really how the story comes about. So when Isis put all the pieces back together again, by miraculous or heavenly means, Osiris was able to impregnate her. It was a virgin birth. And that's how their son Osiris was born. Osiris was also born on the 25th of December to a virgin birth. And he was seen as a solar deity. So he was related to the sun as well, because of that 25th December, the sun, it gets longer after 3 days after the winter solstice. So after Haru reached adulthood, he ruled as a king on earth, and Asar journeyed to the underworld, and he became the king. Because Asar raised from the dead with help of his wife Isis, he became the king of the dead. He will judge you. So after you died, you have to prove to Osiris that you lived a good life, an honest life. And if Osiris agreed, he will grant you eternal life. And then when the sun rises in the morning, you would rise with the sun. But another thing as well, very important to make, is that the story, if you see the film, I think it's a Walt Disney film, Lion King is his story. Because you remember in Lion King, the father was killed, and then the evil uncle, sat on the throne, and then the son came back to rule and to take the throne. Well, this is a story of Horus, because Horus fought Set for the throne. And Set was victorious, and it was judged by god Geb, remember the earth, he was the king of the gods, he judged it, he was the judge of that. And eventually he said, the ruling was that Horus would sit on the throne. So when you see the Lion King story, it's an African story. And Hollywood, Disney have taken it from the African tradition and used it for Hollywood to make a great deal of money, yeah? Okay, right, so moving on. So as the ruler of the dead, he was in the underworld, yeah? And he would judge you. So there's a judgment scene what happened down there. And Osiris, you'll see in his hand a crook, like a shepherd have. And he is called a good shepherd, just like Jesus called a good shepherd. So when we see the life of Jesus, it's a shared life between Osiris and his son Horus. And they made the life of the Jesus, what we know, Jesus the Christ. Asar's rule as a judge of the souls was of the dearly departed was of paramount importance to everyone in Egypt, because everyone in Egypt believed that they wanted to become an Osiris. Why did they want to become an Osiris? Because they were like Osiris, they wanted to resurrect from the dead. So they all prayed to him, and that's why they all went to pilgrimage to Abydos, where they believed that where he was buried. And they'd go there and they would bury something in the ground with a name on it. If you couldn't get there, say for example, I couldn't get there, I knew somebody was going to pilgrimage to Abydos, what I would do, I'd get a bit of pottery, a bit of wood, and write my name on it and say to them, please take it to Abydos and put it into the ground. Because they would hope that being my name buried there, that will grant, Osiris will grant me eternal life so I can live forever in heaven, yeah? So, the person, last thing I want to say to you really for this first one here, I'll continue religion next week because there's a lot more I can tell you. During the night time, for the 12 hours of night, when the sun basically set, the dead soul went through a judgment. And inside the judgment hall was called the judgment hall of Ma'at. So Ma'at was symbolized by a female, by the way. She was the goddess of justice, and her symbol was the scales. So when you look at like a crown court today and you see the scales, again, this is copied from our culture and our history. And the idea of the scales is that when you went into this judgment hall, your heart will be weighed on the scales of justice. Another symbol of Ma'at was an ostrich, and an ostrich feather. So when you was weighed, your heart was weighed, your heart will be on one side of the scale, because they believe that all that what you did was contained in your heart. They used to call the heart the Ib. And on the other side of the scale was a feather, the feather of truth, which is Ma'at's feather. So when they weighed your heart had to be lighter than a feather. If your heart was heavier than a feather, which means that you did naught in wickedness, you lied, then you would be dispatched into nothingness. There was a creature there who would probably just gobble you up. Yeah, the creature was part lion, part hippopotamus, part alligator. This is all mythology, it's not real life, yeah? But you'll be eaten up, yeah? But if your heart was true, you was justified, you were honest, you lived a life like Osiris, then you could be granted eternal life. So I'll give you some more information on that, because it's a bit more than that. So I'll give some more information, yeah? But if your heart was lighter than a feather, and then Osiris says that they will say Ma'at Karu, which means that I was true of voice. If I was the dearly departed, they will grant you eternal life, and then you could rise with the sun to heaven and see your ancestors. You live with God, your ancestors, your dearly departed. You see your grandparents and your friends have passed away as well. Okay, so there's a lot more. So what I could tell you, because of time now, yeah, I'm gonna really wind the show up now, and we can resume again next week. Okay, so I hope you really enjoyed this book show, and this was the first book show we've seen. But I've got so much to tell you. When we talk about religion, we could talk for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, really, when we talk about religion. Okay, so I hope you text into the show, drop some messages on here. You drop some messages in and let me know what you like to do. But I'll continue religion next week. But I want to leave you with that quote, yeah? Because as a people, we must know who we are. We must know ourselves, okay? So the quote I'm going to leave you is that what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves. And what we think of ourselves depends on what we know about ourselves. And what we know of ourselves depends on what we are told about ourselves, okay? So this was the Afrocentricity book show. I hope you're going to tune in next week, and we will have another excellent session, and we'll speak about religion again next week as well, because it's such a long subject, and we've really just dipped our toe into it, okay? So give thanks. Thanks for tuning in today. Tune in next week between 4 or 6 on Sunday, okay?
Come at last, black man progressing in every way. Cause black we are, and black we will always be. Black in the sight of everyone is so beautiful to see. Oh now baby, come on and show me how really black you are. Oh my darling.
Here is a story told to the children of Africa.
We love the children of Africa, teaching the children. Da 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 da, la da da da. Oi. Black eye, black hair, black skin, black queen, stand majestic with the black king. Today I'll sing you a black song. You need to hear about beautiful black things. Cause most time we hear about black, we hear about black magic and black witches. Blacklist, black book, black market, Black Friday, you spend off your black riches. I've never seen a doctor in black, nor seen a black pill for cure no black people. But I've seen bush doctors like Cash and Molly resurrect like a real black beetle. Malcolm, Marcus, Martin. When you see Walter, Rodney, Austin. Oh, you know hear about how well laughing. So when the little offspring asking, tell them they never told us that black is beautiful. They never told us black is beauty. They never told us that black is beautiful. They never told us. They never told us that black is beautiful. You a behave and a go on like you never spent 500 years on a farm. The same chain you a wear and a go on is another black life in Sierra Leone. Boy, them find out Mama Earth got golden. Them find out Mama Earth black soul then. You work hard just to get a black card. Same card where you swipe by back your black gold them. Hold on, I see no faces long, but this is not a racist song. This is a song for the children who was never told about where their race is from. They never hear it in them favorite songs. Everybody calm, I say slavery's done. What I got one when the babies come? I start read about things like Dogans, Black Kemet and Kush, Black Kings, Black Senate and books. We teach about pyramids and put real significance to we physical looks. So every word when we sing black, in my world everything black. Black, white, black, right back. So don't be surprised if me say me king black. Cause they never told us that black is beautiful. They never told us black is beauty. They never told us that black is beautiful. They never told us. They never told us that black is beautiful. No. Is preaching, good God, the things that he preaches. I wonder who taught him to preach. Teacher is teaching, where did he get his degree? Now it is no mystery. Who taught us black history? Peace out.
Black is
beauty, yeah. That's something so much better.
Baby, I'm yours. I am yours forever endlessly. I am yours forever, come what may. Oh, baby, say that you'll be mine. Oh, yeah. Baby, I'm yours. I'll endure in everything you do. No need to pretend I know I love you. Oh, won't you say you love me too? Oh, yeah. You promised that you would love me so dearly. By the look and the light in your eyes, you really care. But now that the moon is shining on the other side, all my money is gone and the love we share. Yeah, baby, I'm yours forever, ever, endlessly. I am yours forever, come what may. Oh, baby, say that you'll be mine. Oh, yeah, yeah. La, 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 la. La 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 la. You promised that you would love me so dearly. By the look and the light in your eyes, you really care. But now that the moon is shining on the other side, say that you'll be mine. Oh yeah. Ooh yeah. I said I need your sweet loving. Yeah. Whoa. I'm yours. I'm yours. Say you love me.
Power is the ability to define someone's reality and have that person accept that definition as if it were their own.
Everything was stripped from us. That's why we're so ignorant today and so baffled and ridiculous and keep